Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this evening's planning meeting. My name is Lawrence Walsh. I'm the chair of the committee. On my right is Councillor Aidan Williams, the vice chair. On my left are senior planning officers. On my further right are officers from legal, highways and democratic services, and both legs of the table are members of council who make up this planning committee. You're all very welcome this evening. Before we start, I would just like to convey a fire safety advice for this evening. If the fire alarm or continuous siren sounds, please could I ask that you leave the building in a calm manner by the nearest fire exit by proceeding left out of the room and down the main stairwell and out of the main civic entrance, which is opposite. Everyone should assemble at the front of the town hall and must not re-enter the building until instructed to do so. If you have a disability which could affect your means of escape, could you please inform a member of staff so that arrangements can be made for your safe evacuation. And we've got some broadcast information. Please be aware that this evening will be recorded for live and for subsequent broadcast on the council's YouTube channel. The whole of the meeting will be recorded, except where there are confidential or exempt items. This activity promotes democratic engagement in accordance with Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972. The cameras will focus on the proceedings of the meeting and avoid areas specifically designated for members of the public. If you object to being filmed, please remain seated in the public seating area. All members and officers must use their microphones provided to enable the audio to be picked up by the system. Members are reminded to turn off their microphones when they are not formally addressing the committee. So the next item on the agenda is apologies. I've got apologies from Councillor Carey, Councillor Winstanley and Councillor Hartley. And we've got substitute members, Councillor Holden, Councillor Akinoa and Councillor Thomas is with us this evening. Councillor Thomas, you wanted to say something?
Sorry, Chair, I will have to leave due to a prior commitment around about 9 o'clock tonight, if that's okay with you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Thomas. We've got the declarations of interest. Have any members got any interest to declare in tonight? I can think of one interest for everybody in this room. It's perhaps escapes some of you, but any other items anybody needs to declare an interest? No? Okay, well, Councillor Patel, a well-known councillor for us, has got an application in Urmston, and we'll be discussing that this evening. So I'll declare a blanket interest for everybody, all the councillors. Councillor Patel is well known to all of us. Minutes of the previous meeting. Would somebody like to declare the minutes of the previous meeting a true and correct record? Councillor Bunting, thanks very much. No questions have been submitted by members of the public. Additional information. AER reports are at the front there. If anybody wants to pick a copy, a member of the public, you're very welcome to them. And before we get to agenda item 6, just a quick reminder to members of the planning committee that, as well as our local knowledge, we look to the background papers listed at the beginning of agenda item 6 as a basis for our decision making this evening. So we'll go to agenda item 6, which is applications to develop, and we're going to go to our first item on the agenda, which is Davy Hume Road, 32 Davy Hume Road. And Councillor Cordingley is going to speak to this application. But before he does, we've got an introduction from Mr. Pearson.
Thank you, Chairman. Terrace property. The area is designated in the local plan as a neighbourhood shopping centre. Permission is sought for a change of use from an off licence to a wine bar, an A4 use. No external alterations are sought. One objection has been received from a resident living above the premises. Neither the local highway authority nor pollution and licensing have raised objection to the application on highway or nuisance grounds, subject to a number of conditions. Subject to conditions relating to hours of use, noise management, the proposed use is considered to be acceptable in terms of its impact on residential amenity and is therefore recommended for approval. Can I just add that if members are minded to approve this application, we would suggest one additional condition, which is not covered in the original report or the additional information report, and that is to request a scheme for the submission of the scheme for the storage of waste and recycling details. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Councillor Cordingley. Yes, please. Before you begin, Councillor Cordingley, if you'd like to take a seat, I actually called this application in as I think you can see in the application. I've been advised by our legal solicitor that I need to step outside of the decision-making process, but I'd like to speak to the item about the issues raising. So I'm going to step outside and Councillor Williams is going to take over the chairing of this item. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Cordingley, if you want to start, you've got 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I won't need the 5 minutes. Very much in favour of this application. The shopping parade is a neighbourhood shopping parade within Stretford. It doesn't have any houses facing it. It's on a little bit of a revival at the moment due to the presence of an Italian restaurant. It's fully occupied along there, and it's becoming a popular place. The applicant has asked for longer hours than has been submitted. To be honest, the restaurant next door has longer hours than the proposed wine bar, and I've been asked if we can extend them so that it would be something like 11 o'clock at weekday and midnight during the weekends. This is not excessive for that place. It was formerly an off license. Don't know what. But the hours were, but it would be normal in Stretford for an off licence to operate to 11 o'clock. It certainly is at my neck of the Neighbourhood Road. And so we would argue that the hours should be 11 o'clock and midnight rather than 10 o'clock and 11, which seems almost to suppress trade in that way. It's probably not viable because of that. So it seems excessive. I'm not really sure why we tried to introduce a 10 o'clock closing on weekday. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Could you get, I think, oh, he's there. Councillor Walsh, do you want to take a seat?
Thank you. So myself and Mike are the local ward councillors, and when this application sort of first came to light in September, it surprised me that there wasn't many representations to it. So I just asked about the consultation, and we've got rules that we stick to for our consultation. The addresses that we contact about an application, and we've stuck to those rules. But I just felt it needed extending a little bit more, so I asked for the application to be called in. And like Mike, I'm quite happy with the application, but I really wanted the neighbours to know about it. So I took it upon myself, knocked on a few doors during the week, and 2 or 3 issues have cropped up. One of them is access to the rear of the building for deliveries. I believe lorries try to access from the rear and do have great difficulty doing that. So I'd be interested in what our highways officer thinks about that. The other thing is the parking at the front. The other businesses, one of the 2 businesses complained to me that there wasn't enough parking at the front, and if the new wine bar opens, that they will lose parking. So another issue perhaps to put to the highways is that could we introduce any restricted parking, say a 1 hour limit on a stretch of that frontage at Neighbourhood Road? And the other point was on part of the residents really who have got concerns, not substantial, but that if the wine bar did cause difficulties in the future, and I have no reason to believe that it will, but if it did, it'd be quite reasonable for the residents to contact me or Councillor Cordingley. They've got our details, and to raise it with licensing. And if it was causing a difficulty, licensing would approach the owner and speak to them about their concerns. But apart from those issues that were raised, Chair, I concur with Councillor Cordon. I think this is a good application, and I'm very happy to support it. But I just wanted to raise those issues on behalf of the residents and other businesses next door to it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Speaker in favour and a speaker sought in favour. Is any member opening the debate? Happy?
Sorry, can I just raise an issue? It might be an issue, it might not be. I'm a governor at the school across the road. Should I have declared that right at the beginning? Yeah. Do I need to step out now then? No.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Are there any members wishing to comment on the application? Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. Very little to say, but just to help move things along, I broadly agree. I agree with the officer's report and with the positive comments that have been made from, well, especially from the first speaker, but also from the second. In terms of the access to the rear, I appreciate the access will be tight, just to try and go through some of the issues. But I would say that would be the same if it was deliveries to a retail unit as well. So I don't think that would possibly provide a decent reason for refusal. And in terms of many of the other businesses, wine bar would tend to be open more evening trade rather than the shops during the day. And so I think we might struggle in terms of justification, in terms of putting restricted parking in there, although I'd be interested to hear what our highways officer has to say. In terms of the licensing issues that Councillor Walsh raised, well, that's again nothing to do with us. We can't obviously, as we've said many times before, we can't obviously impinge on areas that are regulated and controlled by other regulatory systems. So that's a matter for licensing if they have concerns to deal with independently of planning. I can see no reason not to support it. And indeed, I'd go further than that. I'd maybe raise the issue that Councillor Cordingley raised regarding the somewhat restricted opening times. And that obviously it is conditioned as he states, but I will be interested to hear what other members of the committee have to say, and I'd be quite happy in my own mind to support amending that condition just to change those hours. It's only an hour difference. It would make it far more usual for this kind of business that I don't think it would cause any specific impact upon or anything on residents that would cause us to have a concern. And any concerns regarding that could be dealt with via other, perhaps more appropriately dealt with by other bodies such as licensing. So I'm more than happy to propose that, and I think I will actually propose it with the amended hours, and see if anyone else has any opinions on that one. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be very, very brief. I agree entirely with what Councillor Bunting has said. I can't see really any reason for objection. And managed in the right way by other appropriate bodies, I can't see a reason to object. And similarly, I look at the restrictions on hours, and I think I can't see a reason to impose those, and I'm happy to second Councillor Bunting's proposal to amend that recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Minnis.
Yeah, I'm more than. I think it's a good use of the space. I think I have no issue with it. I think the timing. I think 11 and 12 would be better because that's what bars are open to. And otherwise, you're kind of ruining the fun, as it were. So yeah, happy to support. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Ms. Feversham, there was a question about highways. I don't know if you wanted to just give a very brief reflection on what was raised.
Yeah, first of all, in terms of dealing with the rear alleyway, it forms part of the adopted highway. There's no restrictions, and as it's been mentioned, I assume some already do have access to it and use it. And the shop, the conversion, I don't see it's overly much different. Yes, it probably is difficult to drive down, but it's part of the adopted highway, and it's got no restrictions, so I don't see we can do much about the rear alleyway. In terms of the parking, I assume it's met with reference to the area set aside, or the extra width of carriageway in front of the shops, but it's on the carriageway because the area in front, the forecourted area, which does get parked on, I believe at times, is actually private, and doesn't form part of the highway itself. But in terms of putting a parking restriction in, I think you would probably struggle, because I think you'd probably get objections to some sort of limit. I don't really see the need for it as such. I'm not aware there's any complaints or any issues, so don't really see the need to put any parking restrictions outside those shops.
Thank you. Are there any other members looking to speak to this application? No. It's been moved by Councillor Bunting and seconded by Councillor Morgan with the amendment to the condition relating to the opening hours. And we'll move to the vote. All those in favour of the application? Yeah. Okay, that's approved.
Chairman, can I just clarify that point, please? So the suggested revision to the condition was condition 3. And just to clarify, I think the committee is suggesting that it's appropriate to open between Sunday and Thursday and on bank holidays until 11 p.m. at night, and on Friday and Saturday until midnight. And I'm assuming the reason for altering that is because you don't consider there will be any harm to residential amenity as a result of that change. And can I take it that the committee also agreed to the condition which I mentioned in my introduction at the outset, relating to an additional condition for refuse storage? Okay, thank you.
Okay, if we go to page 10, that's the Market Hall Railway Road in Urmston. And with a speaker against this item, and Mr. Matthew Bucknell. Mr. Bucknell, if you'd like to take a seat. And before you begin, we've got an introduction from Mr. Day.
Thank you, Chair. The application site lies within Urmston Town Centre and comprises of a rectangular plot accommodating a part single, part 2-storey and part 3-storey building. The site fronts Railway Road to the south and comprises of a relatively ornate 3-storey building to the front, beyond which are a combination of functionally designed single-storey and 2-storey extensions. The building's ground floor is occupied by several shop units, with the first and second floors accommodating 2 apartments. The plot is bound by Urmston Market to the east, with similar 2- and 2.5-storey properties forming the remainder of the commercial row on Railway Road to the southwest, and residential properties to the rear. The application proposes to remove the existing first floor rear element and add a new extension to the building to form a new restaurant at first floor and 2 one-bedroom apartments at loft level. The extension would have a dual pitched roof and would be 2.5 stories in height for most of its length, before dropping to 2 stories at the rear. The 2.5-storey element would include 4 dormer windows and 4 first floor windows on the side elevation. The current ground floor layout would be retained, apart from the conversion of a single retail unit into a reception area for the restaurant. Other alterations include the installation of a new shop front on the Railway Road frontage and an enclosed bin store to the rear. The proposal is reported to the Planning and Development Management Committee, as the application has received 6 letters of objection, contrary to the officer recommendation of approval. The key issues for consideration are the principle of residential development, together with, and the restaurant development, together with design, residential amenity, and highways and parking impacts. Officers consider the proposal to be acceptable. The development would be acceptably designed. It would not unacceptably impact on residential amenity, and there would be no adverse highways or parking impacts.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Mr. Bucknell, you have 3 minutes. If you'd like to switch your microphone on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I live at number 8 with my wife and 2 young children. We have major concerns about the use of the building being converted to residential and restaurant, particularly in connection with the commercial kitchen waste so close to our boundary, which was less than 3 meters away. This will have a massive impact on our property and lives due to the inevitability of emptying kitchen and restaurant waste, including bottles, late into the evening, and then the bins being collected to emptied, no doubt, early mornings, disturbing our family and young children in particular. On top of the noise disturbance, there will also be the potential of kitchen smells and potential vermin, which will be attracted to such bins, which again will detract from the pleasant living environment ourselves and neighbours enjoy currently. I also don't understand why and how the council would allow planning for another restaurant immediately adjacent to the site of the M41 food hall, which will have multiple restaurants. It seems unnecessary, in which will be a very saturated market, to open yet another restaurant next door. There is also a massive lack of provision for resident parking and issues of strapped curb, driveways being blocked, as well as parking on double yellow lines, which will only increase with the opening of another restaurant. I also have concerns with adding an additional floor to the existing property and how this would alter light reach in our garden and rear to the homes of ours and our neighbours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bucknell. Well timed. If you'd like to return to your seat. Any members wish to comment? Anybody? Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some concerns about this application. I think they've been expressed quite well by Mr. Bucknell. Obviously, it's my ward. I know the area very, very well, and I do want Urmston to grow and thrive. And there seems to be a continuous demand for a nighttime economy in Urmston, and it's growing and growing. So, you know, I would want things like this to be put in place. But I do have some concerns about what the close proximity to other residential properties, like Mr. Bucknell, in terms of the smell and the potential damage to those properties in terms of the local environment. Also, we're not really sure about what would be the total impact on local residents, particularly those living close by, and we take into account those residents who are going to be living there as well in the new development because of the restaurant. So I've got some major concerns about this. I'm very interested to hear what other members have to say and what their feelings are about it, but I do have some concerns. The one thing I'm not concerned about is obviously the impact on the M41 food hall, which is hopefully going ahead. I don't think we can take this into account in terms of the negative impact it will have on that. That's something that we can't do on planning terms. So some concerns. I'm going to listen to what other people say before I make my decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor. Councillor Bunting.
Chairman, I'm more than happy to go now, but I think Councillor Thomas indicated before me. Okay, thank you. I've listened to what the residents had to say, and also the former speaker, and I'm not convinced that I agree with them. I don't see the problems that this application may create. In terms of, if I can just quickly go through them. In terms of things like the commercial waste, or there was mention of the fact that, you know, noise issues, well, and smell and vermin are the three concerns raised regarding that. Well, condition 9 does cover the emptying of bins and does limit the time, and those times seem reasonable to me. I think, and so I think that the noise issue will be resolved. In terms of the smell and the vermin, if I can take those two together, well, I feel there will be commercial style bins, obviously designed to be vermin proof as much as possible and to limit any smell. And the fact that they'll be emptied and go empty regularly, then I don't think that there'll be a particular problem from that. If it were, you'd have the same sort of problem with every restaurant in the area, which obviously would be bad for trade. I mean, no one wants a very smelly bin near their restaurant. So that would, I don't think that that does hold true in terms of a reason for refusal. In terms of the argument that there are too many restaurants in the area, well, as Councillor Proctor himself has alluded to, this is a popular nighttime economy area. This is a sort of centre of Urmston location, and so you would expect to find multiple restaurants. And obviously, a lot of the time, people will come to an area specific from the surrounding residential area specifically for that. So, as you get several restaurants coming up with an area, you actually attract more trade to those restaurants, not less. So, I don't think that would the argument that there'll be too many restaurants in the area and would cause it to have problems would generally stand up to be true. Having looked at the design, I also think it's a reasonable design to fit well into this location. Indeed, I think it represents a substantial investment in the area, and I don't think that given the design and location that it would cause excessive overshadowing in terms of the surrounding properties. And I also would agree with Councillor Proctor that we can't view the impact on a potential food hall as not that I think it would have a massive. There will be an impact, but not necessarily preventative impact. But obviously that hasn't been done yet, so therefore we can't sort of take that into account. So generally, having been through the potential reasons for refusal, I don't think that any of them hold water, and I don't think that this would have the negative impact that the speaker raised. And indeed, if anything, I think this is a positive thing for Urmston. I think this is a further example of the regeneration of Urmston that hopefully will be ongoing and hopefully will bring, as I say, this is a substantial investment in and of itself, and I hope that it will attract more investment as that area sort of picks up in terms of its nighttime economy, and it's been increasing for some time, and hopefully it will continue to do so and continue to become more prosperous as a result. So on those grounds, Chairman, I'm more than happy to accept the officer recommendation, and I'm happy to propose that we recommend grant. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid I would have to agree with Councillor Proctor about misgivings about the position and the disruption to the local area. There is next to no parking at that area at the moment, and throughout the day into the early evening, the available parking is taken along Railway Road. Where the property is double yellow lines, so there's no parking available there. It's going to encroach onto Primrose Avenue with the alleyway that leads through from it. So Primrose Avenue residents will also have will be affecting to their parking. The issues of waste and disposal of, irrespective of when the bins are cleared, the foodstuff that's in there overnight will inevitably attract urban foxes. And also there are occasions of drug use and vagrancy in the alleyways around there. And that obviously will give the opportunity for these people to look to get food for themselves. Unfortunately, these people aren't uptaking of host or any other options that we do offer. So I do think that this will have a negative impact on the local community in that area, and also the profligacy of bars and restaurants, with some of them empty in Urmston now because the amount of trade isn't sustainable for the number we have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I'm going to be agreeing with Councillor Bunting, although, of course, I do completely understand the residents' concerns about the smells and obviously refuse and the kind of encroachment onto your area in terms of the development within the marketplace. But I'd just like to reassure the resident that we do have scrutiny of these effects. So basically, if you are concerned about noise, we have our environmental health department that would look into it. Obviously, concerns about vermin and waste, again, that would be the same thing. And noise, we have our licensing as well as environmental health. So I do support the application, and I think it's a great development for Urmston, really exciting. But at the same time, I understand your concerns, but we do have ways of controlling all of the concerns that you have. And if they did turn out to be real concerns, then the council would be monitoring that and would respond accordingly. So I'd like to offer the speaker some reassurance on that. And in terms of, and also just perhaps to say also that all of those concerns have been through our nuisance committee. They've looked at that, and it's their expert view that it won't cause any concern. So I think we do have to take the guidance that's been offered to us from our officers with our expertise. And in terms of the parking, similarly, perhaps we could have a word from our highways officer, if perhaps you through the chair after I finish, but again, the report does say that there shouldn't be any significant impact on highways. So with all of that said, understand the resident. I do think that any concerns should be allayed by the scrutiny that your councillors and the council will put on the application. And perhaps you could hear from highways if that's possible, Chair. Thank you very much.
Mr. Evanson, would like to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in terms of, we acknowledge that there's no parking directly related to the application. However, the site is in the town centre. There's parking restrictions on streets and there's car parks available within 350 metres. So, and it's good, well served by public transport. So on this occasion, we're happy to support the application.
Thank you. Councillor Cordingley, want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the crime and things like that, the police have raised no objection, and I think we shouldn't be introducing stories that might happen. I mean, any town centre has a nighttime economy. It also has a nighttime underbelly, if you like. There's no town centre in Britain that doesn't. It's sad but true, and it's down to the police to manage that and ourselves. But they've not raised any sort of design for crime objection. The one thing that really I wish the M41 market was built in some ways, because it does feel funny that we are going to allow certain aspects in this that the M41 market hall suggests are difficult in terms of the lean-to area. And that bothers me slightly, that we're almost allowing two contradictory planning rules. But I don't know what we do about that, because if the M41 market hall had been built, then maybe we couldn't allow this, but it hasn't, and that's a difficulty. And I read the representation, and I thought, yeah, I get that, but why don't you build the flipping thing, and we can sort that out. I'm not entirely keen on residential above restaurants, but it's part of our town centre. We can't stop that. It's not the ideal place for a house, but we also want people living in our town centres. So I think we can't really rule that. So I'm left with no reasons to object to this, and I want to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Cording. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to echo Councillor Cordingley, Councillor Bunting and Councillor Dr Barclay. I'm going to be supporting this. I can't really see a particular reason to oppose it. I don't want to go over all the reasons which have been discussed. I think it looks like a good design, particularly keeping the front. I do understand particularly the point about parking. But this is a town centre location. I can't see how this significantly changes what probably is an issue already on some of those neighbouring streets. And if that is an issue, it needs looking at by other bodies. And I don't think it should be, it isn't, and it shouldn't be the role of this committee to affect that. So I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Jerome.
I'll also be supporting this application as well. You do have to take into account some of the residents' worries, and I think they're not wrong to be worried about that. But this also brings accommodation into a town centre, and that's a proven way of revitalising town centres. So I see bringing accommodation into the town centre as a good thing. I think the restaurant will also, boost trade in Urmston. But it's also well designed, and I think it improves upon the current design and makes it a lot more attractive and friendly. So I think on balance, it would be good for the town. I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. Anybody else? Can I ask Mr. Day, just ask about the separation distance from the new restaurant to number 8 to Mr. Bucknell's property? Would that be normally in line with our guidelines? put you on the spot there, Mr. Day. Sorry, apologies for that.
Convinced was 4 metres.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody, other members like to comment? Councillor Thomas again, yes?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just, with it being my my first sojourn into the planning, can I just say that, am I reading it wrong? That it's actually reducing the amount of accommodation because it's making 2 smaller flats out of 2 large flats, because the restaurant's going into the first floor and above it there are 2 residences, which will be, there's the first floor residence at the moment, plus 1 above it, and then we're going to 2 smaller residences in the on the second floor as such, ground 1, 2.
I'll ask our officers to comment on that, Councillor Thomas, as well. Mr. Day?
Sorry, coming back on the first.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, the rear gable would be 4 metres from the rear garden boundary. In terms of the apartments, I don't think we actually have a layout plan of the original, the existing apartments, but obviously there wouldn't be an increase in the numbers of residential units. There are 2 apartments on the site at the moment, and there would be 2 apartments in this scheme. So,
switch the microphone off. So what I'm getting at is the distance between number 8 Primrose and the new restaurant. You're comfortable with that distance? You think it's sufficient? That's Mr. Bucknell's case, basically.
you mean in terms of whether there would be an overbearing impact? Or
Yes.
Well, there's already a 2-storey building in that position on the site, albeit with a hipped roof at the moment. So our view is that there wouldn't be a significantly greater impact, that would lead to a reason for refusal of the application.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Abe. Councillor Minnis.
It's so difficult because I think I can see. I really feel sorry for. It's basically did that distance where I'm glad you've gone and asked that, because I was going to ask how far away is it, and I see that it's obviously we have it's a town centre. It's good to have restaurants and things. I think it's how you keep a town centre going. I really don't like the 4 metres. It's not that far, is it really? It's quite close. What is the rules on how close it can be?
Mr. Pearson, you want to comment?
Sorry, Councillor. Yeah, there isn't a rule as such. It is down to a judgment as to whether or not it's going to have any impact. And as today said, there's a 2-storey building there now, and so the difference we're looking at is the difference between the gable roof and the hip roof. And the judgment is that that's not going to cause so much additional harm that it would be that we could warrant refusing the application on that basis.
I think, Councillor Miss, where I was coming from, if it was particularly near, I know you're not comfortable with 4 metres, but that gives me some reassurance. It's not being built on top of number 8, if I can say that in broad terms. There's already a 2-storey building there. So I think the issues around smell and disturbance, as other members have said, that would be dealt with through licensing. I don't see that distance is so significant to warrant refusal, because we are sympathetic to what Mr. Bucknell has said. It's been moved that we grant this application. As any other members want to comment, moved that we grant this application. Has it been seconded? I think Councillor Dr. Barclay seconded it. She's happy to. It's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. And those against? That application has been granted. Thank you. I'm going to go to page 27. That's Greenbank House, 15 Albert Square in Altrincham. And we have a Mr. Clancy wishing to speak to this item. Mr. Clancy, like to take a seat. And before you begin, Mr. Day, you're going to give us an introduction to this item.
Yep, this application relates to Greenbank House, sited to the eastern side of Albert Square in Altrincham. Greenbank House was a former large Victorian villa, now comprises of flats. The site is surrounded by residential properties and is located wholly within the Downs Conservation Area. Planning permission was granted in April 2018 for the erection of a detached dwelling following the demolition of the existing garage block on the eastern side of Greenbank House, in addition to works to Greenbank House and alterations to the landscape layout, including a new parking layout and a bin store. The approved scheme has been partly implemented, and the new dwelling is partly constructed on site. The new dwelling has not been constructed in accordance with the approved plans listed within condition 3 of the original planning permission. This application therefore seeks to vary condition 3 in order to approve amendments to the new dwelling. The proposed alterations which are subject to this application include alterations to the dwelling's position, an increase in the width and height of the new dwelling, alterations to the proposed fenestration. The roof lights would now include an upstand and would not be flush with the roof as approved, and changes to the soft and hard landscaping and car park layout. The application is reported to committee as 12 letters of objection have been received, contrary to the officer recommendation of approval. The key issues for consideration are the impact of the amendments on the conservation area, together with visual amenity and residential amenity. The proposed alterations to the new dwelling, plus changes to the landscaping and car parking layout, are considered to be acceptable in terms of design, visual appearance, and impact on amenity. Furthermore, the proposed changes are considered to lead to no harm to the character and appearance of the Downs Conservation Area. The application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Mr. Clancy, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
There we are. First of all, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I speak on behalf of a number of elderly residents who are alongside. Now, first of all, may I point out that you would not be reconsidering this if I hadn't reported the matter to Trafford. And then all of a sudden, it became very interested in these breaches. Now, I assume, first of all, I've been on the planning committee myself elsewhere. I assume that all members have read the copious documents associated with this matter. We're talking about a building that would fit in this area here, and it's been shown up there. Now, as we said, there's 18 on the website notice, there are 18 drawings. And in the list that was on the officer's report on the website, there was a list of drawings that we were to consider. But the drawings on the website do not accord with the list. That's a matter of fact. I know, I'm in the game. Now, so what are we approving this evening? Are we approving the list as given on the site? There's no, in the report this evening, there's no list, there's no drawings given. Now, I'd like to ask how many members have actually been to look at this site? One gentleman? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Well, I'm pleased to see a number of them won't pass to their souls, so I'll give them that. So, right, you will then know that the drawings that you are showing, the drawings you're being shown here, do not reflect the situation on site. Flick through them. Next one. Next one. No, right, okay. Because the next one shows the situation as you are being led to believe, but is not actually the situation. Now, those people who've bothered to look at this submission will know that it's not correct. It's contradictory, it's conflicting, it's ambiguous, it's incorrect. In fact, I would describe it as careless, possibly negligently careless. I hate to say or to suggest that it is anything worse. So, what is correct? What are you considering this evening, ladies and gentlemen? You don't know what you're approving because you haven't got any details. Now, again, may I ask the officers, are they aware that the report on the website is not the same as the report that's been given to you this evening?
Mr. Mr. Clancy,
One thing I'm saying, I only want one thing of all the breaches of approvals that we.
thank you, Mr. Clancy. If you'd like to return to your seat, please. Mr. Clancy, I'll ask you one more time to return to your seat.
I would suggest there's some fix somewhere, and I don't know what it is.
Mr. Clancy, if you'd like to return to your seat, please.
I know, so my colleagues. Thank you.
Very disappointed with your actions, Mr. Clancy. Very disappointed. I'm going to ask officers to comment, Mr. Clancy. And Mr. Clancy, may I say, officers will comment, and I would be very grateful if you did not interrupt them. You've had your 3 minutes to speak, and I will not allow you to partake in the meeting any further. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can clarify that quite simply. Members will be approving the scheme which is in front of them this evening, which is the scheme, and the plans for that scheme are set out in condition number 2. There are 12 plans in that condition. No, they do not reflect quite what has been built on site, and that is because officers have negotiated further amendments to that to be secured by the set of conditions that we have on the report, so that some betterment is brought to what is on site at present. There is no fix. That is just exactly as it is. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Coley. Any members like to comment? Anybody? Councillor Cordingley.
I can remember coming to planning when Phil Gratrix was on here, and he would make a complaint when people had built things that they hadn't applied for. And I take that point completely, that this hasn't been built as it was originally planned. Having said that, I have visited the property, and the bottom line is not whether what was built was similar to the plans or not, but whether it is a reasonable building in that neighbourhood in respect to the plans before us. And I find it really hard. In some ways, I'd like it to be knocked down and started and built as according to the plans, but that would just be petty. What we've got in front of us is not out of character to the neighbourhood. It's appropriate to the neighbourhood. It's a good build. I think it's probably, for my taste, it's got too much tarmac in front of it. But then that's probably my particular, being a cyclist.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. As a councillor in the ward, I am really, really disappointed that once again we have a builder and a scheme that has not really kept to the approved plans. We had that with our Alexandra House, and we brought that back here. And obviously that we were not successful in dealing with that. That went ahead again for the same reasons. I understand pragmatically it's really difficult to be absolutely sure before you build, and then when you build you have to make amendments. But we're talking about massive builds here and taking a lot of space, and really having a huge impact on our residents. So I think we ought to really give a clear message tonight from this planning committee that we don't want to see any further applications come forward where people have built not according to plans. And I'm really would like to send out a strong message of disapproval to the current builders at that site, having been distressed by what the builders did at Alexandra House. And I really do feel that we should try and do that. So I really appreciate the comments from Councillor Cordingley, who equally feels the same. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to echo both Councillor Dr. Barclay and Councillor Cordingley. What we're actually being asked to vote for tonight is a relatively small change to what has been approved. So you read the application, it is a variation of condition 3 and it is small amendments, but I have to agree with both of them. It is to put a condition in a planning application which then goes through the planning system. It is not just frustrating for this committee, but it's also for the fact of the planning department to actually do this, and then a building is built not in line with a condition that has been made. And I think it's actually disgraceful, to be honest. But it is a minor amendment, and you do have to take pragmatism on board. I think in local government particularly. So I don't see a reason really to object to it. But I completely understand the frustration which the local residents feel and that it's been taken by us having to do this.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm as irritated as my colleagues who've already spoken by this kind of thing. Unfortunately, you are allowed to put in retrospective planning applications. You are allowed to do that, and we have to assess them on the same grounds as we would do otherwise. You can't hold that against them. Indeed, there'd be nothing to stop you building an entire building and then retrospectively applying for. Obviously, you're running the risk of it being refused and being asked to take it down, but that's the risk you take. You are allowed to do that. Clearly, they've built it in the way that they've decided they wish to, and regularise it afterwards. That's the only realistic explanation for what's happened. The only other alternative is that the builder hasn't got half a clue how to use a tape measure. But I'm assuming that it's probably most likely the first of those two reasons. So yes, Councillor Morgan is absolutely right. It's a relatively minor amendment. Yes, it would have been better if they'd bothered to apply for it correctly in the first place, but no, we can't refuse it on those grounds. That would simply be a dead cert for an appeal. So it is with reluctance and with very little enthusiasm. I'm simply led by procedures that are to vote in favour of this application, although I regret the need for it being here in the first place. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Anybody else? Councillor Jerome.
Yeah, I also want to echo the points that have been made that this is quite disappointing. And is it the same developer that had to put another planning application or a change of planning application in at Oak House on Barrington Road? So I just wondered if this particular developer is doing this more often than not.
Okay, thank you everybody for your comments. It's not actually been, I sense reluctance around the committee on this item. I certainly do, but it hasn't actually been moved and seconded that we grant this. I do need a mover to move and second it. Councillor Corder is going to move it. Would anybody like to second it? Councillor Williams has seconded it. Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour of granting, please show. Those against? That application has been approved. Thank you. Mr. Clancy, I did remind you, I did speak to you earlier and said I wouldn't let you come back into the meeting. I'm not prepared to do that now. So,
yes, they have. Chairman, just confirm, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. Thank you. Thank you. Postpone the meeting till these gentlemen have left, everybody. If you just sit tight. Okay, thanks everybody. We're going to go to page 48. That's Beach House, Manchester Road in Partington. And we've got a Miss Dixon wishing to speak to us. Miss Dixon, if you'd like to take a seat. Before you begin, Mr. Day is going to give us an introduction to this item.
Thank you, Chair. The application site comprises of a 0.17 hectare plot to the southeast of Manchester Road, the A6144, and to the northeast of Partington Local Centre. The site currently accommodates a two-storey Edwardian-era main building with 20th century single-storey side and rear extensions. These buildings are currently vacant and were formerly used as a nursing home. The plot is accessed from Manchester Road and is bound by residential properties on all sides. The application proposes the redevelopment of the site for housing, comprising of 5 three-bedroom dwellings in total, through the conversion of the original building into 2 dwellings, the erection of a 2-storey side extension to this building to provide 2 further dwellings, and the erection of a detached bungalow at the rear of the site. The application proposes an amended vehicle access from Manchester Road and an access route running along the site's northeast boundary. 7 parking spaces would be provided towards the rear of the site and 2 on the Manchester Road frontage. The application is reported to committee as 8 letters of objection have been received, contrary to the officer recommendation of approval. The key issues for consideration are the principle of residential developments, together with design, residential amenity, and highways and parking impacts. Officers consider the proposal to be acceptable. The development would be acceptably designed, would not unacceptably impact on residential amenity, and whilst the LHA has objected on the grounds of the shortfall of 1 parking space, officers consider that this would not result in significant on-street parking impacts and would allow for additional landscaping that would improve the appearance of the site. The application is therefore recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Ms Dixon, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of residents in Dean Close and Hardwick Road who are surrounding this site on both sides. The existing residents have lived with the effects of poorly maintained property for several years at the home, even before the home was closed, and we will be pleased that the site will be cleaned up. But our experiences previously with the owner lead us to concerns of who is going to be responsible for the upkeep of common areas on the site that are going to encroach on our properties. We appreciate the efforts that Mr. Parkinson, the planning officer, has made in trying to allay our concerns, but overall those concerns still remain. We personally will be faced with parking for 7 vehicles very close to one boundary of our garden and a new residence very close to the other boundary, which will be at the rear of our garden. Residents are concerned about the potential number of vehicles entering and leaving the site. The committee report states that planting would reduce any noise and pollution, but we're rather sceptical about this, particularly as we've got no details on what that entails yet. The report also states that residents are already used to the problem of transport, vehicles coming in and out, pollution, noise, from the home, but that isn't the case because vehicles weren't entering and leaving at different times of the day and night, which could be the case with new houses. We note that there's under provision of parking spaces leaving us in the same position as before, when vehicles visiting the home parked and blocked Dean Close. So there is potential also that the 1 turning space provided will be used for parking. We understand that Trafford wants to encourage development and new homes, but the committee report states that this isn't harmful to local amenity, and that's incorrect. This is an extremely small site, and to be honest, the diagrams don't show that. We can see that cleaning up the site will be beneficial to everybody, but it will be detrimental to the people living around the site. The report states that the development isn't acceptable at the expense of surrounding properties. The proposed bungalow at the rear of our property, although it's actually moved further away from our fence now, it remains 1 metre from each boundary of either side, and that's Dean Close and Hardwick. The report admits that that's too close, but in several places it says that the closeness of the buildings would be acceptable, as it would be evident to any new occupiers, but it gives them a choice. It doesn't give us any choice. We're going to have a building 1 metre from our home. We want to know, are we not considered in the same way? While I was researching this, it seemed that other councils do have required distances, which would mean that this...
Ms Dixon, you need to wrap up. Thank you, Ms Dixon. If you'd like to return to your seat. Any members wish to comment? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to thank Ms Dixon for her comments, which I think articulated very effectively the concerns that residents on Dean Close have about the application. I'm not so much concerned about, you referred to the upkeep of common areas on the site, but the one sort of shared concern I had with you related to the parking, as I understand that part of it is below our standard. And I was just wondering if the Highways Officer would perhaps reflect on that, if possible.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of our representation, excuse me, we have identified the shortfall, and we still believe that we should be looking to achieve the maximum standards on this particular site. Partington has some limited accessibility associated with the area anyway, and also the Manchester Road's classified road, heavily trafficked, and the alignment of the road's not ideal if they were to park on there. So we've maintained our position that in this particular instance, we feel that 10 parking spaces can be achieved on the site, and therefore we believe that that should be the case. Thank you.
Can I say, Mr Emerson, the 9 spaces are allocated, but you're thinking 10 can be managed on there. I think our officers talked about green space and planting. You'd be happier to sacrifice that green space and planting for another parking space, I presume. For the committee to decide. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. So, excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. I've listened carefully to the arguments made, and some of them I agree with, and some of them I don't. I'll agree with Councillor Williams, who just said that the upkeep for the common areas. I think that is an issue that is reasonably but fairly straightforwardly managed. I don't think that would cause a significant issue. I also don't think that would stand up in terms of any kind of appeal in terms of refusing the application. I'm also not convinced about the closeness of the layout being such a problem. I accept that it's a concern for the neighbours, and I accept that it's going to be a change. But given the fact it's a low-level bungalow, I don't think, and yes, it is a metre away and from the boundary, but I don't think that will be unsurmountable. I accept what the resident has to say about distances and separation distances, but they are, as always, guidelines. And as we've said many times in the past at this committee, they're not hard and fast rules. They are there to guide and not to act as a straitjacket for development. I think that on the positive, I think the site is it's always good to see a site brought back into use, and I think the design, most of the design, fits in well on this site. The one sticking problem that I have that I think may cause me to disagree with the officers on this individual application is the parking space. I accept that Highways, on this occasion, I accept their argument. I know we often talk about parking standards being maximums and not minimums, and that given the various circumstances that we find ourselves in at various applications, that we can accept less than the maximum. But on this occasion, I don't think this is one of those occasions. And I'm going to agree with our Highways officers that this is a significant issue. I don't think it would take a great deal of a tweak to make this application acceptable. I think we should sacrifice some of our nice soft landscaping on this occasion to fulfil maximum parking standards on that, because I think there is a serious highways issue here. As the highways officer has alluded to only a moment or two ago, this is a somewhat busy road. It is not the safest of roads to deal with, and I would hate to see anything that would cause an issue. And so I'm going to make a proposal of refuse, Chairman, on the grounds of that parking space, on the grounds of a significant concern regarding highway safety. It will not take much of a tweak to have this application back, more or less unamended, apart from the parking issue. And then I'm sure if one issue were resolved, I will be able to give it my support. But I am going to propose refusal on the grounds of on that highways grounds, as the highways officer has stated clearly. It is more than possible to resolve this issue, more than possible to achieve maximum parking standard and avoid creating a highways issue here. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, before you come in, Councillor Morgan, Ms. Cole, would you like to comment?
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think we need to go. The committee need to go so far as to refuse the application. I think the applicant has throughout been amenable to changes. If the committee are concerned about this issue and Councillor Bunting's alternative motion is carried, I think we could just go back to them and ask them to change it. And if you were satisfied that you could defer and delegate that issue to officers to deal with an amended site plan which gives an extra parking space, then we could deal with it that way.
Councillor Bunting, you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If Mrs. Coley believes she can achieve it by that route, I'm more than happy to see that happen. As I say, I don't think it would take a great deal of a tweak to make this acceptable, but as it stands, it isn't. If Mrs. Coley believes she can achieve it by that route, I'm more than happy to accept that.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to echo a lot of the concerns that Councillor Bunting raised, but I mean, I would be happy to see an amendment or approve this either way. I do understand the residents' concerns, but I do think, I mean, I put actually this down. It's a pretty ugly shape, and they've done their best that they can actually do with and it is bringing brownfield site back into use. We've got a need for the housing, and I do understand the issue of the drive, but we are only talking about 5 houses here. It's not building a huge block of flats there. So I'm happy to support either way, but I will be supporting this development.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Jerome.
I also agree with Councillor Morgan that this is providing much needed housing on brownfield space, which is I think to be applauded. I mean, it is a tight space for the amount of housing they're putting in, but I think it just about works. One of my worries is that they are savaging or removing these trees, particularly the leylandii at the front. It's proven that these are a barrier to pollution, and this is one road that's heavily polluted and has a great amount of traffic on it, and it seems strange to me that they should be removing one of those barriers to pollution that will protect the people that are living in those houses. So that's the only sticking point for me. And so I'd be happier if the trees were being kept, and I think the residents would be protected more by doing that.
Anybody else wish to comment? I went to view on Sunday. It was the worst day possible, and I hear what the residents say, but I don't think those issues that they raise, and quite reasonable that they are, I don't think they're so significant that we can refuse this application. I think Councillor Bunting alluded to that. It wouldn't stand up at appeal. But I am sympathetic to the parking. It's an unusual site. You know, we don't normally turn down applications about parking, certainly not one space. But at that location, next to Manchester Road, which is so busy, I think this is kind of a special case. So I'm happy that we're talking about deferment, and Councillor Bunting's proposed it. Councillor Morgan seconded it. If anybody else wants to speak, I don't think they do, we'll move to a vote on that to defer this item and let Miss Coley and officers deal with that extra parking space that we think it needs. All those in favour of deferment, please show. And those against? That application has been deferred. Thank you. We're going to go to page 71. That's land adjacent to Soccer Dome, Trafford Way, Trafford Park. I have a speaker in favour of this application, Mr. Scott Penman. Mr. Penman, I'd like to take a seat. And before you begin, Mr. Pearson's going to give us an introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, planning permission is sought for the creation of an outdoor football facility comprising 8 all-weather 3G pitches, clubhouse and associated fencing, floodlighting and parking. This is intended to replace the facility to be lost within the existing Soccer Dome building, as proposed by an application elsewhere on this agenda. The application site is located within the Trafford Centre rectangle strategic location and is currently an area of scrubland. No representations have been received on this application. The development is considered to be acceptable in principle in terms of its design, appearance and impact on amenity. Highways impacts have been considered cumulatively with other committed developments and those associated with the Event City relocation and have been found to be acceptable by both Highways England and the local highway authority. It's considered that the proposed development is acceptable in all respects and the application is therefore recommended for approval subject to conditions.
Thank you. Before we begin, Mr. Penman, I need to step outside of the meeting again, the next 2 items, because I actually called these 2 applications in. Councillor Williams will chair these items. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Penman, you've got 3 minutes to speak. If you just make sure your microphone's on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. Yeah, my name's Scott Penman. I'm the owner of 5 soccer centres in support of the application for the new soccer centre. We acquired the lease on the Soccer Dome on Trafford Park in March 2019, following the exit of the previous operator, Power League, who had deemed the facility to no longer be financially viable to be able to continue. I've been in the small-sided football industry for 20 years and been involved in the Soccer Dome in some capacity over the last 12 years. And part of coming in and taking over the lease on the facility was about trying to find a commercially viable solution to ensure that grassroots football could remain on Trafford Park. And that is essentially why we're here today. It's fair to say that pitch inventory across the borough over the last 10 years has increased significantly, which has put pressure on the financial viability of the Soccer Dome. Some of you may be aware that there's been various remodels that have happened during the last particularly sort of 5 or 6 years, with multi-sport courts going in, trampolining centres going in, and some other schemes that unfortunately didn't come to fruition. So a lot of work has been undertaken by all parties involved to try and find that viable solution to ensure that the Soccer Dome had a life moving forward. Unfortunately, it's fair to say that given the sort of tired nature of the facility itself and the required investment that would be necessary to move forward, means that the viability is seriously under pressure, which is why we've brought the application to build a brand new facility, which allows us to build it more sort of purpose-built on a slightly smaller scale, but more importantly, make sure that it's built in such a way where it has got a longevity and protection for the future. And to that end, we've worked hand in hand with Manchester FA, with the Football Foundation and also Sports England, to ensure that this particular facility that we build will be the first FA approved and follow the FA guidelines for small-sided football in the whole of the UK, which therefore then means we can work hand in hand with the FA in terms of grassroots development. Many soccer games can be played in the facility where at this particular moment in time they can't be, and they can't be in various other commercial soccer centres across the country. So it was our opinion that moving to a new facility would protect not just the 2,000 to 3,000 footballers that currently use it, but also allow us to build something that would be sustainable for the long term. What that centre looks like once it would be completed, as I've already said, is FA compliant, but also will have a digital feel to it. It will be completely digitally compliant. It will be a much more of a self-service element to it, digital scoreboards,
you can just wrap up.
Sure, no problem. That's pretty much me, to be fair.
Thank you. If you want to return to your seat. Councillor Walsh, were you speaking to this item? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Briefly, the reason I call this application is and added to the application that's coming after it for Event City, I was just concerned about the traffic. There'd been no comments from any of the neighbours. They were quite happy with it. But anybody who goes through to the Trafford Centre on an Event City day, if I call it, knows how busy it is there. And I just wanted committee to be aware of those issues and to think about the highways. Very much support both applications, and particularly this one for the football pitches. But that's what I'm about. It's for a committee to think about the highways issues, and perhaps a comment from a highways officer would be useful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Any members looking to speak to this item? Councillor, I've forgotten your name, Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. John. I'm fully in support of this. I have nephews that are feared of losing valuable training space. I have clubs within my ward and other wards that are feared of losing valuable all-weather training space. I think this is crucial for sport in this area in M41, and I wholeheartedly back it.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Cordingley.
Totally in support of this. Really excited by the digital side of recording fitness and things like that the speaker was alluding to. I've heard that before. People wearing belts so that they can monitor heartbeats and things like this while they're playing football. It brings state of the art to an ordinary Friday night with the lads or girls football match. So really supportive of this. Disappointed slightly that there hasn't been more representation. It's gone quiet a little bit, because when we were losing soccer ball, there was quite a lot of consternation. So there's not much come from the public, and so it's gone quiet a little bit, which is a little bit disappointing. We need to get the buzz around this back up again, because it's a brilliant application and I'm totally in support of it. I get what Councillor Walsh was saying in terms of highways issues and transport. And there is an issue, perhaps less with the football than the Event City. And I hope in some ways that they can feed off each other and have a bus service, because I think Event City will need an extension of the bus service, even if this doesn't, and this could benefit from it. Because right now, well, with the old soccer ball, because I used to take the lad playing there, I used to give him a lift, and it was Testosterone City on those roads. It was super. You'd come up with idiots really racing after the football match. I don't know why, but they'd go mad. And there was no bus there, so it was their only choice. So hopefully this football will be much more civilized, because maybe with Event City we can get some other means of getting down there other than just driving fast cars down the country lanes to it.
Thank you. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think it's a really exciting application. I'm very happy to support it. We know that within the borough, it's really important that we encourage our residents to keep fit, keep slim, exercise, and we know how absolutely crucial that is. And I think that the development is going to definitely contribute to that. And of course, we know that we also have really poor weather at times, and the all-weather pitches are so crucial for matches taking place. So I think there's loads of positive things about the development. I'm really, really excited about it. Can't wait for it to be developed, and I give my full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Proctor.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, fully support this as well. I mean, there is a lack of outdoor good quality football facilities in the borough, and this would help to redress that to some degree. It's badly needed in terms of the health agenda, which people have already said. So I think we should be really promoting this. There is a big issue about congestion around Trafford Centre in general, but I don't think this would in any way contribute to that. There is 50 car parking spaces, which is probably enough for what's required there. And although there's general congestion, I don't think this is going to particularly contribute to that in any way, shape, or form. And I'm fully supportive of this. And like Councillor Cording said, it's surprising this has been much more of a buzz about this, because when facilities have closed down, there's been a big media impact on it, and we don't seem to know very much about this. So I'm really glad that this is happening, and I think it should be promoted quite extensively. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stennett, are you indicating?
Thanks, Chair. It's a very exciting project, especially as it relates to grassroots level. And I think if there's no time, it's now when we need to be encouraging that type of sports. And I would just think in terms of one person used a term one time, from grassroots to stadium. A very exciting project. We all seem to be supporting this. So I'm willing to support the discussion this evening.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to add anything in terms of a story like Councillor Cordingley is, because I have to say I'm not particularly interested in football, but in terms of actually improving sporting facilities across the borough is absolutely vital. I do understand Councillor Walsh's point about the traffic around the Trafford Centre, but I don't really think this is the thing which will tip that balance. I think there's far bigger problems relating to particularly at key points of shopping, really, and I think it's a very appropriate development in terms of the issues that we have in terms of improving physical health as well as mental health. So I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Canola.
I'd also like to echo what everyone else has said, and also just remind everyone that in terms of traffic, the tram's going to be opened up soon to the Trafford Centre, so hopefully a lot more people will use that.
Thank you. Is there any other member looking to speak to this item? I don't think it's technically been proposed and seconded, as I understand. No. Proposed by Councillor Thomas. Anyone prepared to second it? Councillor Proctor. Okay, we'll move to a vote. All those in favour of the application, please show. Okay, it's carried unanimously. Thank you. The next item to be discussed is Soccer Dome Trafford Way, page 99 on your reports pack. Again, this was called in by Councillor Walsh, so he will not be chairing the meeting at this point. I understand Mr. Fillingham is going to speak. Thank you. So just before you make your contribution, there'll be an introduction from our planning department. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah. Planning permission sought for the change of use of this building from a D2 assembly and leisure use to a D1 non-residential institution use. This is to enable the building to accommodate the relocated Event City facility, the conference and exhibition centre, which is currently situated to the southeast of Barton Square on Barton Dock Road. The proposal also includes the erection of extensions to the northwest and southwest elevations and external alterations to the building itself, including a new entrance feature to the southeast elevation. The application site is located within the Trafford Centre rectangle strategic location and is currently occupied by Soccer Dome. which accommodates the DW Sports and Fitness Centre and 5 Soccer. Again, no representations have been received in relation to this application. It's considered to be acceptable in principle and in terms of design, appearance and impact on amenity. Sport England is satisfied that the loss of the football pitches will be adequately mitigated by 5's outdoor facility, and the highways impacts have been considered cumulatively with existing committed developments, including those associated with the proposed 5's facility, and are found to be acceptable by both Highways England and the Highway Authority. It's considered that the development is acceptable in all respects, and the application is therefore recommended for approval, subject to the conditions in the main report and those in the additional information report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Pearson. Mr. Fillingham, you've got 3 minutes to speak. If you just make sure your microphone's on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Nick Fillingham. I'm from WSP Indigo, speaking on behalf of the applicant tonight in support of this application. Soccer Dome was opened in 1987 as a purpose-built football facility, and having been in operation for over 30 years, it's become a well-known facility in Trafford, situated in a gateway location. The proposals would see a £20 million investment into the refurbishment of the existing building into a highly sustainable and fit-for-purpose events and conferencing facility. The change of use will facilitate the relocation of Event City from its current site on Phoenix Way and help achieve Event City's mission to provide world-class events that connect and the shared values of business and community in a flexible, more attractive facility that will allow the business to respond to demand for a wide range of events. Once operational, the facility will place Event City at the forefront of the events market in the UK and in turn support the Trafford visitor economy. Its relocation will also pave the way for the proposed once-in-a-generation Thermae Wellness Resort at the existing Events City site. As set out by Mr. Penman in the application just determined, the commercial viability of Trafford Soccer Dome has been in decline for a number of years. I won't repeat all the comments that Mr. Penman's already given you, given the fact that you've already approved it. However, Peel recognises that the importance the role of a football facility in this location provides, and is committed to ensuring the continuity of access to sports pitches by providing a new football facility which will secure the long-term sustainable provision of a five-a-side football in Trafford City. The change of use will therefore secure the long-term use of the Soccer Dome site and provide Event City with an ideal facility to sustain and grow its commercial operation in the longer term. Your officer's positive report clearly sets out that the proposal constitutes a policy-compliant development in this location of the borough. It also confirms that the change of use of the existing building to a more sustainable and viable use is supported. Furthermore, Sport England supports the proposal, subject to the conditions and the provision of the new Fives football facility. The application is also fully supported by other consultees, including in terms of Highways Impact, who accept that there will be no adverse environmental impacts generated by the proposals, and there have been no objections from members of the public. Considering all these points, the proposals are in accordance with the development plan and the MPPF. The proposals are therefore supported by the Planning Department and statutory consultees. All these factors weigh heavily in favour of granting planning permission, and I therefore respectfully ask that the committee approves this application tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fillingham. If you want to return to your seat. Councillor Walsh, are you speaking to this?
Just briefly, Chair, I'd like to thank my ward colleague, Councillor Cordney, for looking at the positives of the new soccer pitches. I'm worrying about highways, and he's looking at perhaps the more important thing, the positive element to it, and I hope he's created that buzz that we want to surround that. I'm just interested in TFGM's comments around this particular application for Event City's movement. And I seem to have read or have heard that they're asking for a camera to be installed when it's particularly busy. Event City exhibitions don't happen every weekend, but they certainly do happen. When they do, they have an impact. So I'd ask Highways if they would comment on that, the particular problems that happen on Event City days when it's open to exhibitions. That's it, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any member looking to speak to the item? No, perhaps Councillor accordingly.
Thanks, Chair. Just briefly on this issue of TFGM, I don't know whether we can put a recommendation to the council that they look at public transport to that area once it's built. There's no point in doing it before it's completed, but when Event City moves down there, it is quite isolated. I know Councillor Akinola was talking about the tram, but this new place for Event City is a long way from where the tram stops. It is isolated, really. You have to go almost past what's the name of the ski slope, Chill City or whatever it is. Yeah, so it's not easy to get to on foot from the Trafford Centre. So I think, given what Councillor Walsh was saying about monitoring this and the popularity of Event City days, and I'm hoping we can make that the owners make really good use of this, so that it's in operation a lot of the time. That would be the ideal. That it will justify a bus service down there, which isn't needed at the moment, but will be if you have these big weekends, whether it be, I don't know, Caravan City or Wedding Day. The one, they seem to bring thousands in on those days, and it brings gridlock. But if you haven't got a car, then you won't be able to get to it easily.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, personally, I think there's been an opportunity missed with liaison to get the tram to service that area as well. It would have linked everything and made a good impact on car usage to the area. But the only concern that I have is, as has been alluded to, where public transport stops, it's very difficult to get across that road to where Event City is hopefully going to be. And perhaps we could look at putting conditions in to ensure that there is public access to the site, because otherwise it's just going to be Car City, not Event City.
Councillor Walsh made a request about some input from highways, and I don't know if you could comment, Mr. Worship.
Yeah. And yes, in terms of TFGM's request, we've had a look at the application, and whilst we understand where TFGM are coming from, and certainly the management of that roundabout, when Event City is really busy, then there will be some wider benefits, not just solely for that, but also for the whole area of the Trafford Centre. Although our concern in terms of supporting a condition associated with that, we didn't really think we could justify it in terms of the development itself. And that's the reason why we stopped short of that in terms of a recommendation as part of the application.
Are any members looking to contribute further? No. Councillor Morgan.
I was just going to say, Chair, I'm happy to propose this. If someone's got a second.
Councillor Akinola.
I just wanted to ask, are highways happy with the amount of car parking space? It seems a vast difference from what was at the original Event City, and I'm assuming it's aiming for more, if not similar numbers.
Yeah, in terms of Event City, it actually utilises all the car parks within the surrounding area. It hasn't really got that much parking associated with it, and it's evolved and grown into what it currently is today. So what presently happens is they utilise the Trafford Centre. They bring people in through minibuses and various other aspects. So they actually utilise other parking spaces across that area. So that specifically, Event City doesn't have much parking, certainly nowhere near enough parking for the facility. And as part of the traffic management plan, where there's a condition, that will ultimately be the same thing, that they will utilise other car parks across the wider area, and it needs to be bring people into Event City as what is part of the planning permission, if you like, should you grant permission tonight. So what this actually does, where Event City evolved without necessarily real conditions associated with it, this is tying it down, so it's what they already do, but formalising it more. So no, Event City hasn't got much parking. It does need parking on the really big events, but we utilise the parking across the wider area of the Trafford Centre.
Thank you, Chair. Again, if you, through yourself, if we could ask how the difference is that the Event City was across a 2-lane carriageway with temporary crossing lights to facilitate pedestrians getting from the said car parks across, where it's going to be sited is across a 6-lane, in some places 7-lane thoroughfare that is very difficult to cross. So I would be minded to say that I think that should be of an urgent consideration.
I do accept that point, but each of the arms of the network does have pedestrian facilities. Yes, in terms of how busy it is and how far you go across, but the area itself and the junctions, which you probably are alluding to, do have pedestrian facilities. Yes, it's busy road, but the facilities are there, so they're not going. In fact, yes, they put temporary measures in, but they are permanent measures in place currently. I don't see that it's not connected to the wider area ultimately, and there are some additional improvements to footways locally. So there are the controls already at that Bridgewater Circle junction.
Thank you. Yeah, my point is that the pedestrian crossing to Event City in its existing location was a dedicated crossing. The crossings that you're talking about are to small islands across a 3- and 4-lane carriageway where the refuge is in the middle. There's no barrier at all to protect any pedestrian crossing that. We're talking about a large number of pedestrians going over that circle if the public transport remains as is, the terminus at the Trafford Centre and the proposed or the eventual tram terminus outside Selfridges. You would still have to walk across there. And as I say, the crossing to Event City as we speak, it's a temporary, yes, but specifically pedestrian crossing, which stops the traffic away from the circle at Barton Square, and they cross and move to it. This is on traffic control. I'm not saying that there's an easy solution. What I'm saying is we should take a bearings in that and look at what provision we're going to make for the huge increase in pedestrian numbers at certain times when Event City is there. Because at the moment, no, it's not very well used because people drive in. When Event City is there, we're hoping that people will use the metro and use public transport, and that is a huge road that they're going to have to cross.
In terms of the traffic management plan, those aspects will be mopped up in terms of that. But I don't think there isn't the only really solution is to build a bridge over the top. But as part of the traffic management plan, those aspects would be part of that in terms of how they manage what goes on, which will need to be consulted with various other bodies because there will be inevitably be traffic management which needs to be put in a temporary basis, as per it does happen now.
I feel as though you might not be fully satisfied, Councillor, but
yeah, that's the assurance I was looking for, to something to alleviate when it comes in. Now, as long as that's in the forward planning, I think I support that. I fully support the application.
Okay, well, the application's been proposed. I don't think it's been formally seconded. Is the member happy to formally second the application? That we approve the application, Councillor Akinola. So we've had the application proposed and seconded. We'll move to a vote, and those in favour, if you can indicate now. Yeah, okay, that application's carried.
Okay, everybody, we're going to go to page 134. That's 2 Elliston Drive in Urmston. We have no speakers to this item, and this is Councillor Patel's application. Any members wish to comment? Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chairman. All very straightforward. Nothing much to say. Simply propose a grant. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Anybody else? Councillor Thomas.
Second and support.
It's been moved and seconded that we grant this application. All those in favour, please show. Anybody against? That application has been granted. Thank you. Okay, we're going to go to agenda item 7 on your very thick pack this evening. That's land to the east and west of Warburton Lane in Warburton. Ms. Cole is going to give us an introduction.
Thank you, Chairman. There's quite a bit of additional information on this item. If I will refer members to the additional information report at times as well. It's a fairly swift-moving proposal at the moment, as will be explained. So it's an outline planning application with only access to be considered at this stage. And the development proposed is for up to 400 dwellings, together with new points of access, the provision of formal, informal, open space, ancillary landscaping, car parking, and highways and drainage works. Now, this is not a standard determination by this planning committee this evening. An appeal against non-determination has been submitted by the applicant, Redrow Homes, on the grounds that we did not determine the application in the statutory period. And following the lodging of that appeal, the council no longer has the ability to determine the application, and the decision maker is now the Secretary of State via the Planning Inspectorate. The proposal will be considered at a public inquiry, which is scheduled for April. But there is a need ahead of that inquiry and ahead of the exchange of statements of case and proof of evidence, a need to establish the council's case, which we will present at the inquiry. As matters stand this evening, officers are suggesting 10 deemed reasons for refusal to be presented to that inquiry. However, since the publication of the original officers' report, the situation has altered in respect of certain issues, and this is all covered in the additional information report. However, I'll report some things specifically to you. It includes a written submission received today from the applicant. An officer's full response to the submission is set out in the additional information, but confirms in summary that the proposed roundabout proposal for Flixton Crossroads, which was a previous proposal which was later superseded, does not constitute acceptable mitigation, as advised by the local highway authority. That alternative mitigation for Flixton Crossroads suggested by the local highway authority would need to be in place prior to any occupation of the proposed development. The submission of planning applications for new bridge crossings across Red Brook does not advance these proposals to a degree that they address officers' concerns, even in part, in respect to the connectivity of the site to Partington. The applicant's acceptance of some form of public transport contribution is noted, and the submitted details for a Pelican crossing on Warburton Lane are accepted. The additional information report also highlights a further indicative reason for refusal in the event that the applicant is not accepting of additional conditions. There is some prospect that the application site will need to accommodate key pieces of road infrastructure in the southern part of the allocation. However, the application submission has not presently accounted for this. The effect would be a development which would not enable wider integration and would not facilitate future sustainable growth. Other matters covered in the additional information report are intended to seek clarity on a number of issues, including on heritage assets, housing figures, existing public transport, the principle of the development, and potential financial contributions. There has been some adjustment to the wording of all indicative reasons for refusal, and a full set is set out in the additional information report as amended. But the overall officers' conclusions are unchanged. Officers fully acknowledge that this council does not have a 5-year housing land supply, and that the presumption in favour of sustainable development in paragraph 11D of the MPPF is engaged, which typically requires the application of the tilted balance. In this respect, the proposal would deliver up to 400 new homes, although it's to be noted that no affordable housing is proposed. It is further recognised that the site forms part of the draft New Carrington allocation within the GMSF. However, as demonstrated in the reports to committee, officers have concluded that there are compelling reasons why permission should nonetheless be refused. Available evidence suggests that the site has considerable potential to include heritage assets with significant archaeological interest. However, the applicant has failed to provide a robust assessment of the significance of these assets, and further site investigation is warranted. There are also shortcomings in the applicant's assessment of the proposal's impact on built heritage assets, and some harm of a less than substantial nature has been concluded. The heritage harm in totality would not be outweighed by the public benefits. The tests in paragraphs 195 and 196 of the NPPF have failed, and this in itself provides a freestanding reason to resist the proposed development. This is despite the presumption in favour being engaged, it is considered and overrides the tilted balance. This is a site which is out on a limb from the urban area and suffers from poor accessibility and significant difficulties with integration. In the future, if and when major development comes forward as part of New Carrington, the existing constraints on delivering sustainable development here may be overcome. However, until this properly master plan development occurs with associated infrastructure, roads and public transport, then there are major obstacles to achieving sustainable development in this location. Furthermore, the proposed development provides no affordable housing, and no credible financial viability evidence to support this position has been provided. In addition, at this stage, no provision has been made for the development to contribute towards extended primary schools, and matters surrounding a potential public transport contribution are still unresolved. The traffic impacts of the development have been found not to amount to a severe impact in NPPF terms, but this is subject to Grampian conditions requiring mitigation at 3 key junctions before any of the development could be occupied. The applicant's commitment to such conditions is not yet known. The site also has landscape sensitivity. However, the submitted landscape and visual impact has understated the level of harm that would arise, and it's considered that the proposal would adversely impact on the local landscape and would destroy some rural views. The design vision for the site has also been deemed unacceptable, with the parameters plan failing to convince officers that a sensitive, well-connected, integrated and inclusive development could be delivered. Given the overall sensitivity of the site and the potential need to accommodate new infrastructure, it has been concluded that an outline submission, backed up only by a parameters plan and some supporting indicative material, is fundamentally inappropriate. There are thus multiple reasons why this application has failed to receive the support of officers. Whilst officers do not believe that the tilted balance is triggered given the heritage harm identified, if it were, then it is still considered that the adverse impacts of granting planning permission would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. This is the position that officers recommend the Council adopts at the forthcoming inquiry, whilst allowing for any reasonable continuing negotiations with the applicant as part of the appeal process. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for all that, Ms Coley. Anybody wish to comment? Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And I've sort of scribbled down some thoughts about this because I do think it is important that the planning committee is able to have a determination on applications of this size. And it's a shame that tonight we're not voting on an application, we're just voting on the contents of a report for an inquiry. As a councillor for Partington, and this proposed development's a matter of metres away from the ward boundary of Bucklow St Martin's ward. I feel that over the past sort of couple of years on the planning committee, I've started to acquire a more acute understanding of the complexities that are at stake in the local area. This committee has had a really large role in determining a number of applications in the area recently. I think there's either 9 or 10 that are listed on pages 7 to 9 for other relevant planning applications. And those applications have come to this committee because of the impact that would be had on the local community, particularly in respect of highways, but also relating to other infrastructure features in the area. So I think it's really disappointing that this developer has demonstrated so little interest in bringing forward a positive development. And when you read through paragraphs 74 to 79, that becomes really evident. In some respects, I find the report really quite amazing, if I'm being honest. I've never seen an application receive such uniform opposition. The development locally was quite widely known about because the developer held a public consultation at the start of the process. I attended the one at the Fuse, and it was really well attended. So that's why it's so striking that there's been 64 local residents who felt the need to submit a formal written opposition, and then a further 4 non-residents, including I think Councillor Anstey, who've submitted written objections as well. We've then got objections from Warburton Parish Council, Partington Parish Council, Dunham Parish Council, and Positive Partington Residents Group. You know, the strength of feeling about this proposed development is really, really high. And yet, as the report also highlights, there has not been a single representation received in support of the development. But when reflecting on that, I'm not actually surprised about the stark contrast in support that the developer has received, because the developers themselves have shown nothing but contempt for the local community here. You know, and where that become really evident for me was when you read through the paragraph on unaffordable housing, and committee will be aware that that's one of my one of the things I always look to when it comes to residential development. And it's clear from the report that nowhere has the developer shown any interest in it. The local authority here in Trafford has an expectation that in an area like Warburton, we would be looking for a 45% contribution to affordable housing, 45% of the total development falling into the tenure type of affordable housing. And yet this developer has chosen not just to fall a little bit short of that, but not even to propose one single unit out of over 400 houses would be affordable. And I just think that's absolutely appalling. You know, Trafford has an ambition to try and foster mixed, intergenerational and sustainable communities that can meet the diverse need of our population. And it's just so clear that this developer doesn't have any interest in that. This strikes me as being a land grab to try and throw up as many units as quickly as possible, flog them off and cream off as much profit as possible. And frankly, I think that that's the impression that local residents have been left with as well, which goes some way to explain the sort of representations that have been received. So I feel really strongly that, you know, Trafford can do better. It's entitled to do better. We're entitled to do better, and local residents deserve better. So I'm happy to support everything that's written in the report. I think it's really robust, and I thank officers for all of the work they put into this. And I can only expect that it must have been an extremely tedious process, given that we're now at the stage that we are. So, as I said, I won't be supporting the content of the report before us tonight. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Anybody else? Councillor Bunting.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Given the extremely comprehensive overview from Mrs. Coley before we started, and then the speech just made by our Vice Chairman, I don't think it's pretty much all been said. So, and you'll be glad to know I don't intend on rehearsing it. Other than to say you are absolutely correct, there is very much a one-sided picture. When planning officers don't want you to go ahead, they give you 1 or 2 reasons for refusal. When they really don't want you to go ahead, they give you 3 or 4. When they absolutely don't want you to go ahead, they give you 10. So I think it's all a very clear-cut, one-sided argument. I'm more than happy to second the proposal made by our Vice Chairman, i.e. that we simply we don't make, well, effectively we don't make a decision. We just say that if we were in a position to make a decision, we would refuse it, but we're not, so we can't. So with that said, Chairman, that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Councillor Dr. Barclay.
Thank you, Chairman. I definitely support the views taken by officers within the report. The development actually, although it's very close to Partington, is actually within Bowden Ward, and I know from the views of the Warburton Parish Council particularly, they're very, very concerned about the development, and obviously won't repeat all the things that they've listed, but it's certainly something that our residents would not welcome. And I don't think it's just that. I don't think it would be a particularly nice development to live on. One thing that's very isolated and cut off, and we're not sure about nursery places and school places. I just think it's a really ill thought out planning application, a very kind of selfish application. Certainly wouldn't benefit local residents, and I would definitely be happy to support the officers' views within the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dr. Barclay. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to echo what has absolutely been said, particularly Councillor Dr. Barclay and Councillor Williams. Absolutely support the report as written, and thank the officers for an unbelievably comprehensive report. To be building this many houses on greenfield arable land, and not to have any provision of affordable homes and no provision for the impact that huge number of additional people will have on local services, particularly schools, is shocking. Absolutely shocking. So absolutely support the views, and can't really say any more than what's already been said and written down comprehensively.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Councillor Holden.
I'd just like to add a comment and a request for information. I know this area quite well. It's in proximity of two of the best eating places in this part of the borough. It's also right next to the HS2 proposed corridor. Has any consideration in the report been given to the additional impact that HS2 would have on this development and on the surrounding area?
Yes, it was dealt with through the noise. It is, however, for HS2 because that is a later proposal to mitigate if it proves to be necessary, not for this to anticipate what the impact of HS2 might be before that becomes effectively HS2 is a proposal, but it doesn't have any weight in planning at present because the hybrid bill hasn't passed. At that point, it has to, but it would need to consider how it mitigated its impacts should the planning inspector disagree with this authority and permit the development.
So is there a suggestion that the developers want to get something done before HS2 arrives?
I couldn't possibly comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Holden. Councillor Cordingley.
Thanks, Chair. Echo everything that's been said. I'm just, to be honest, this is the first time I've come across this situation where they are trying to sort of, if you like, do a run round the planning process and go straight to the Secretary of State. So just so that I'm confident that we're going through this best equipped as we can, do we really need the normal councillors' input into this process in order to take it onto the next level, which effectively is an appeal? Is that what I'm struggling to understand? In a sense, is it just a question put before us? Do you agree with this, or do we need to put our own stamp on this discussion? Does that make sense a little bit? I'm curious.
When you have an appeal against an undetermination, although we can't determine it, we need to present a case. We need to tell the planning inspectorate what we would have done had we had an opportunity to determine the planning application. So in the same way as we would bring an application for you to determine, we're bringing this to you to determine what we would have done. You might agree entirely with the officer report, you might not. If you're not obliged to, but if they're in the same way as any other planning application, if you have further comments or further issues, you're entitled to raise them at this time.
That's useful to know, and I'm pretty sure that we have added to that already in the discussion. The points I would be particularly bothered about are schools, proximity to it. There's no town centre, is there, devised in this? It's not really. It's not quite just looking at the map, it's not quite Partington. It's certainly not walking distance to the town centre of Partington. I realise it's in Bowden Ward, but it'll be Partington that they look to for their facilities. The heritage side of this is something I'm passionate about. Warburton has been subject to umpteen archaeological digs over the years. In fact, Warburton is quite a famous place for its digs, and I'd hate to lose the opportunity to do that. And I think if they've not done a thorough enough job it's a disgrace, frankly, that they've not done that, because it was an important place, Warburton, with the church and everything. It's an important parish. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, I back everything. It really cheeses me off that we're having to give it in quarter of an hour when it hasn't gone through the press, the stuff like that you would normally get with a big development. It's almost gone through on the slide this way, and I feel that it's atrocious. My last question would be: do members of the committee need to prepare for the next stage? Will the chair have to present at the next stage?
No, we have a full set of partly internal witnesses and partly some consultants to present the proofs of evidence. That doesn't mean that members, if they feel strongly can't, it's a public inquiry, you can request to be heard by the inspector and come and make representations if you wish to do so.
I think members would like to know the date of the inquiry and notice when it's happening, so they could attend.
It starts on the 21st of April and runs till the 1st of May, 8 days. It will be sorry, Chairman. The first week is here. The second week, because of the clash with election counting, is at Manchester United.
Okay, thanks for that. Any other comments? Do we need to take a vote on this item?
Yes.
We do. So we need a proposer and a seconder? Yes. Councillor Councillor Dr. Barker is proposing. Councillor Bunting would like to second it. All those in favour of the officer's recommendation? Am I wording that correctly? And that's unanimous, I think. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to go to agenda item 8. That's the Trafford Civic Quarter Area Action Plan.
There will be a presentation on the screen, so just bear with me. Dave, do you mind getting up on there as well? Just bear with me. I need to be able to see it myself as well. That's just being arranged. It's fine. It's fine. It's, I'll just move it. That's fine. Okay, that'll do. Thank you, Chairman. This is just a report for information for members. There's been a few applications over the last few months at Planning Committee which have been within the Civic Quarter area, and where there have been questions raised about the Civic Quarter Area Action Plan and the implications of that for decision making. So I agreed with the chairman that I'd bring this report to you during the consultation process, because it will in time become a material consideration and important, well, the starting point for decision making within the Civic Quarter boundary. So the Civic Quarter is a 55 hectare site. It's centred on the town hall, and we're finding it's an area of significant change. Recently, planning applications for medium to high density development that we'd not really seen in the past. New issues for us as planners in terms of not being able to apply our standard separation distances in any meaningful way because they're designed for suburban layouts effectively, and dealing with those, and also housing numbers and the pressure and the loss of some of the office accommodation round here. But also there's a community in the Civic Quarter area. There's Hornby and Barlow roads. There's people in some of the apartments, and obviously around the edge in Gorse Hill and in the Gorses, there's a substantive residential community. The other thing that's through the work that we've done on the area action plan is the history of this, the hidden history. White City used to be the botanical garden and was the had the great exhibition, the largest number of people who turned up one year or something. The architect tells it much better than I do. If anybody's seen Ernst present this, and some of that really kind of fell into being able to think about putting street scenes back, and I think that's a really important thing that comes out through the AAP, that you've got these big footprint uses in the area, whereas previously you had quite modest streets, and you can return some of that to the area and start to build communities around that. And I think that's really important. Hold on, sorry, I'm just trying to see this properly. It's not letting me. Okay. So there's a number of objectives. Go down. Yeah, excellent. And primarily, we're looking at a huge brownfield site. There are 21 individual development parcels that we've identified. All of them are brownfield. There are no greenfield sites within there, or certainly nothing that we would propose development on, because there are bits of open space. They're generally not publicly accessible, but improving access to those is one of the things we can do. At a relative medium to high density development of about 170 dwellings per hectare, you could deliver up to 4,000 homes within the civic quarter, and there can be a range of homes. If anybody's seen the Kellogg site proposals, there's a mix on there in terms of the scope and family homes. Make the best use of the connections and the tram, sustainable transport. There's obviously job creation, and then the links, particularly in the northern part of the civic quarter, where it's close to Salford Quays. There's a potential there. It would need a bit of a shift in the market, but to replace some of the office and commercial accommodation which has been lost in the last few years from around here. So that's the vision. I'm not going to read it out. But it can deliver real change to the area at these kind of new higher densities and with better use of the land. So in terms of how it would sit for your decision-making purposes, it would be a development plan. So it would sit alongside the core strategy and the GMSF, should that be adopted, or our emerging local plan. It would be the first thing that you would look at. So this would be the development plan for this area. The policies in the rest of the core strategy, such as our design policies, would still stand. You would consider those alongside them. And below that would be SPGs and SPDs, which are guidance. There's a list of policies. Again, I'm not going to read them out. Lawrence has asked me to focus on one. So I have. And I'll get to it. That's a processional route. So the processional route, you will recall from the Lancashire application last time we met, was an important proposal in terms of taking of some contributions for the processional route, and that's in the core strategy now. But this particular policy takes that a bit further and talks about supporting the delivery of the processional route. It would run from the Metrolink station up to the top of Warwick Road. It probably extend beyond that, but the civic quarter boundary doesn't go beyond and up to Manchester United. And this policy allows us both to make better use and better frontages onto Warwick Road and Brian Staither Way, and make sure that development addresses that. But also hooked underneath this would be an ability to take contributions from sites which don't necessarily sit on the processional route, but within the wider civic quarter, to go into that and to feed in, because the civic quarter as a whole would benefit from this particular policy. So it includes the pedestrianisation of Brian Staither Way, which wouldn't come forward through the plan, but would need to come forward through the proposals. Talks about improved access at Metrolink, activating the frontages, being able to provide retail, food and drink. So Cafe Nero is popular. There's probably, if you get more footfall and up and then you get dwell time, and rather than everybody just running onto the tram at the end of an event, people might spend more time spend their money, and that there's less. And if it's a nicer environment, then people are less likely to abuse that. So the next thing we've got are the 5 neighbourhood areas. So we split in terms of the public realm and urban design. We split it down into 5 areas, which you can see on the slide there. And then I've done a case study of the eastern neighbourhood. The eastern neighbourhood is the one which has got most of the interesting heritage in it. So you've got the Tudor Beetham Bowling Club, which is I think one of the oldest facilities of its type still there. Is in English Heritage's book about sport in Manchester. Then you've got a number of Victorian villas, and then you've got a fragmented street scene beyond that. So there's an opportunity to get that rhythm back in the street through proposals. And the other thing that's in place is the old wall to the botanical gardens is still there at the back. And one thing that we're looking at is, could there be a pedestrian route which runs along that wall, and could this plan help to bring that forward by when planning applications come in and somebody wants to build right to the back of the plot, so no, bring it forward, and then you can put that route across, and as that comes forward you can start to deliver that particular route. You've also got the wellbeing route in this particular quarter, which is the Talbot Road, which is about further enhancing the cycle facilities at Talbot Road, greening it, and making not shutting it all the time to vehicular traffic, but shutting it up more regularly and more comprehensively on event days, and enabling movement through it. So just a little bit on public consultation. It's underway at the moment. Started last week, finishes on the 20th of March. We've published everything on the council website. We've written to every resident and business within the area, and also a number of the residents for a sensible distance beyond. And there's 2 specific ticketed events being held on the 26th of February and 10th of March, which anybody's welcome to come along to, but from this room. There's also been, the executive were quite keen that we engaged with schools, so that's sometimes a bit easier said than done, but we're trying our best to get some links in with our education department to see if any of the schools want to run an event or something like that. Just that for this, it's like for planning applications, you've got to respond in writing. So if people turn up to events and tell us something, we can't take that into account. They need to write it down and send it to us for us to lawfully take it into account. But anything on social media, again, we wouldn't take any account of. So just an excuse to show this picture because we really like it. And any questions?
I'm sure someone's got a question to ask. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. And again, thank you, Ms. Coley, and all of the work you've done. I know I've looked at this plan several times now, at different occasions. This is a question I haven't asked before, and it's something that I've only just really thought of from a comment you mentioned about closing Talbot Road off for traffic more often. I know I said to you it was one thing that I actually was not concerned about, but wanted to really understand more, is how we could actually green this rather than just shrinking the lanes. But actually, the only way you're going to make it a well-being route is actually reducing the amount of traffic that actually goes down it. But if we are closing it off on more match days, is it not going to be quite a lot of pressure on Great Stone Road? Or are you planning to actually go beyond the actual civic quarter, where Talbot Road and Chester Road separate? I'm just thinking that's a far easier point than just before the civic quarter junction, if that makes any sense.
To be honest, and I think Jeff will confirm or otherwise, don't think we've determined exactly where we would shut it yet, but there's some transport evidence that lies behind it, which talks about how that traffic might move in a different way if we were to do that. Jeff, have you got anything to add to that?
In terms of shutting it during the events, etc., I must admit we've equally been consulted and we were mindful of it, obviously. So we need to go into some detail to actually respond to that particular point. But I don't think it's the intention at this moment in time. Yes, to dissuade traffic as a general rule down Talbot Road, with the landscaping, various other aspects, but not necessarily exclude traffic totally, is my understanding, is a general time, not necessarily during events as such.
Exactly how Jeff has described it. Yes, no, there are no concrete proposals to shut the road more often than we do at present, but it's an aspiration in there, and we think the plan would help to deliver that.
And just as a quick follow-up, just on the second point, really, about if it was an event, are you not going to, and you are closing it, and I know you've not even thought yet how you're going to close it, etc. But if you're going to close it at the junction with Talbot Road and Great Stone Road, you're going to put in quite a lot of pressure on what are semi-residential roads around there, in terms of whether, or can you extend it to the Talbot Road, Chester Road junction, or have you not really thought about that yet? Which is a fine answer in the third.
Yeah, not there yet.
It is a consultation, Councillor Morgan. If you wanted to put your comments in writing, asking those questions, I'm sure someone would come back to you. Councillor Bunting, you wanted to comment?
Yes, Chairman. I mean, I must admit, I don't agree with a lot of the proposals that have been put forward, especially the trying to, restrict traffic. I understand why you're doing it, sort of create a sort of slight aggrandizement around the civic quarter that perhaps maybe is or is not a good thing. I think you're going to cause significant issues for other roads in the area when you try and do this. And I'd suggest that most of the civic quarter proposals are either neutral or slightly negative. There's not a great deal of positive in there, but it's only proposal at this stage. We'll see what comes forward. But personally, I think it's essentially going to be something of a damp squib, and not particularly wonderful. There'll be some positive aspects, but not a great deal. So I'm more than happy to note the report, but maybe somewhat less enthusiastic than others seem to be.
Thank you, Councillor Bunting. Anybody else? Councillor Jerome.
I've got the opposing view to Councillor Bunting. I mean, when we had the Trafford Open Day, we closed the road down on Talbot Road, and that was, I think, in conjunction with the cricket and the road being closed down, and it was excellent. I was able to cycle off and do some planning application visits at the same time, and it was, and I think Trafford should be doing more of this type of thing. It's a great idea.
Thank you, Councillor Jerome. Can I ask, on that processional route, so would that limit, we couldn't say if someone came along and said we wanted to put an office block on Warwick Road, because that didn't have an active frontage, would this civic plan preclude that? Would that stop that happening?
Not the principle of that, no, because we would just require that office block to have and there's no reason an office block couldn't necessarily have an active frontage, right, and improve public realm in the same way as any other type of scheme. If the office block wasn't appropriate for other reasons, then.
And if anybody had a suggestion that we might extend the processional route to Manchester United, that'd be a reasonable suggestion to write down and send in to officers.
Yes, it would. I mean, that would fall outside the boundary. One thing that is being developed at the moment is the Wharfside master plan, which, although wouldn't be a statutory development plan, would be a plan for that particular area, and that would bring the processional route up to Manchester United, but just outside the boundary. I mean, the boundary is not fixed, as I say, it's a consultation. We think it's a sensible one, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily the right one.
Thank you, Ms. Coley. Anybody else? I don't share Councillor Bunting's pessimism about this. I tend to agree with Councillor Jerome. When we've done it in the past, it's worked very, very well, and it's exciting for the people who visit. And we want to create a buzz. Councillor Codley talked about that earlier. We want to create a buzz, and we can create a buzz around this area. And the town hall is a magnificent building, and that's what we want to do. So let's be positive about this, and let's contribute and look forward to the future. Okay, do we need to take a vote on that, or are we happy? We don't. Just for noting. Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 9 is the next one. That's a stopping order on Christie Road. Mr. Evanson, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is associated with the former Itron site. It's just a very small slither of highway which needs to be stopped up to enable the Miller Homes development to proceed as per the permitted development. It's effectively, it would be in somebody's front garden, so it's just formalising a very small piece of, closing up a very small piece of highway, ultimately.
Thank you. Anybody like to comment? Councillor Bunting?
No comments, Chairman, just support the recommendation.
Councillor Morgan?
Second that.
All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Agenda item 11 is a stopping up order on Cavendish Road, and I've actually had some involvement with this application. So yet again, I'll be sitting out for this item, and Councillor Williams will be chairing it. Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Do you want to just do a brief introduction to it?
Yeah, this is just a small piece of highway which formerly led up to an industrial unit. It runs between two properties, and they've got an application in to turn it into garden. So we're just seeking your approval for the closure.
Councillor Morgan?
Happy to support this, Councillor Williams.
Councillor Bunting?
Seconded, Chairman.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. If you indicate if you're in support of that. Okay, that's carried.
Okay, everybody, thank you. That comes to the end of the agenda items. Miss Coley wants to talk to you about another issue. Councillor Cordingley.
I mean, that last one, perhaps that was appropriate, but the two before, used about the two earlier, that where you had called it in and then had to walk out because you'd called it in so that the committee could have a look at the plans and then had to make yourself create a vacant seat. Now that just seems crazy to me as a lay person. Either you want to have your say or you don't. But this idea of you having to vacate your seat, I found frankly bizarre.
Thank you, Councillor Cordingley. I don't know if anybody from would like to comment from our legal.
Simply, the chairman called in the application and he then made representations as the ward councillor. So he was having a different hat on, basically. So when you call it in, you do it, you sort of, the implication is you have got, it's to show that you've determined the matter in a sort of fair-minded way, really. And so you haven't got to show any sort of particular interest in that matter. So that was why it happened. So you're not actually representing, you're speaking as ward councillor effectively on that one.
I think because I'm the chairman of the committee, I think it might have been deemed that I'd be leading the committee if I took part after calling it in. Perhaps am I making it a special item that needs special interest and the chairman supporting that? And I think my advice this evening was to step outside so that no impropriety could be conceived by members of the public. Councillor Bunting.
Chairman, am I not correct that it's not just the chairman it would apply to? If any of us called in an application, then you would be expected to stand down in the same way if a member of the planning committee would do.
Is that
The only thing I would say, Chair, is that normally if we called it in, we would have to give a reason. Those two at Event City, you didn't give a reason. It was just called in. And I found it quite, as I say, bizarre that reason from up there, whereas you could have made the same points from where you were.
Councillor Bunting wanted to come in.
I wasn't going to mention that point. I was deliberately ignoring it because I remember one of your predecessors, although of a different political colour, saying that obviously raising issues regarding validity of calling and what have you. Now, obviously, in order to call an application in, you're normally supposed to give a planning reason for doing so. I have concerns over X, or I have concerns over Y. Somebody saying, I want the planning committee to have a look at this, was not deemed to be a valid call-in. I remember there being several occasions when call-ins were refused on those grounds because the chairman told the person concerned that that wasn't a valid reason for calling in. So I simply wanted to get clarity on that, if I may, please.
The chairman can call any application in anywhere with at their own discretion, just because they want it to be at the committee. Same as I can refer anything to the committee.
Yes, of course, they changed the rules. So they changed the rules, didn't they?
He said you got to leave.
Would it not be simpler, Chairman, simply to try and get one of your colleagues to call the application in instead?
Well, I thought, I think I said earlier that I was concerned about the highways issues at those two in Trafford Park. That, I think I did give a reason. Perhaps it wasn't in the agenda, and it should have been. No. Yeah. Yeah.
Just seems bizarre.
Yeah.
Having done your duties of the meeting.
Okay, we've got one more. Councillor Jerome's want to comment quickly. Councillor Jerome.
Yeah, just you're right, because it would be how it would appear to the public if you were to call it in and chair. I do think there is a conflict there. So
okay, we've debated this issue enough. I'll sleep better tonight after your support. Thank you. Miss Coley just wants to run an issue past you, Miss Coley.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really for the meeting. If we can close.
Oh, so we'll formally close the meeting. Thank you, Miss Coley. Thank you, Councillor Thomas.